Imagine a world where the U.S. loses its protective shield in the north and its gas station in the south. Sounds like a post-apocalyptic movie, right? Well, for Washington, it's a literal geopolitical nightmare. We were talking about Greenland, a massive block of ice sitting on a gold mine of minerals, and Venezuela, a country literally floating on more oil than Saudi Arabia. To the untrained eye, Greenland is just a giant ice cube, and Venezuela is a nation in crisis. But to the Pentagon and Wall Street, these are the two infinity stones of the Western Hemisphere. If the U.S. loses its grip on these, the American century ends tomorrow. We're talking about a race for the minerals that power your phone, the oil that fuels the Navy, and the radar sites that keep nukes from hitting New York. It's a story of Vikings, billionaires, secret bases, and a Cold War that never actually thawed. Strap in, because we were going deep into why Uncle Sam is willing to bet the house on these two massive assets. When people think of Greenland, they think of silence. They think of nothingness. But for the United States military, Greenland is the loudest place on Earth. To understand why the U.S. is obsessed with this island, we have to look at the top-of-the-world perspective. If you look at a standard map, Greenland looks like it's off in the corner. But if you look at a polar projection, looking down from the North Pole, Greenland is the ultimate gatekeeper. It is the Great Wall between the Russian Arctic and the North American coastline. Now let's get real for a second. Why does a bunch of ice matter in 2026? It's because the high north is the new Middle East, but instead of sand, it's slush. For decades, the Arctic was a frozen conflict, literally. But as the permafrost melts, the Arctic scramble is on. Greenland is the crown jewel because it controls the Geopolitics gap. That stands for Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom. If you are a Russian sub-captain trying to sneak into the Atlantic to cut the undersea fiber optic cables that keep the American internet running, you have to pass through this gap. If the U.S. doesn't have its ears, sonar, and radar on Greenland, the Atlantic becomes a playground for rivals. Let's talk about Petrovsk Space Base. This place is straight out of a James Bond flick. It's the U.S. military's northernmost installation. It eases so far north that the sun does not even bother showing up for months at a time. But the radar there? It's the early warning backbone for North America. We're talking about the ANFPS-132 upgraded early warning radar. This beast can track objects the size of a soda can from thousands of miles away. If a rogue actor or a superpower decides to lob a nuke over the pole, Petrovsk is the reason D.C. has time to react. Without Greenland, the U.S. is essentially flying blind in the north. But wait, there's more. It's not just about defense, it's about the new Suez Canal. The Northwest Passage and the Northern Sea Route are becoming viable. Shipping companies are drooling over this. Why go through the Panama Canal or the Suez when you can shave 4,000 miles off a trip from Shanghai to New York? If the U.S. holds the keys to Greenland, it holds the keys to the future of global trade logistics. If China gets a foothold here, which they've been trying to do by offering to build civilian airports that look suspiciously like military runways, they can project power right into America's backyard. And we can't ignore the rare earth elements, REEs. This is the big one, guys. Greenland is sitting on what might be the largest untapped deposits of neodymium and praseodymium on Earth. You need these for the magnets in EV motors and, more importantly, for the guidance systems of every high-tech missile in the U.S. arsenal. Right now, China owns about 80–90% of the REE supply chain. They can turn off the American military-industrial complex with one export ban. Greenland is the get-out-of-jail-free card. By securing mining rights in places like Kvanefjeld, the U.S. isn't just buying dirt, it's buying national security for the next century. So when you hear a president talk about buying Greenland, don't laugh. It's the most logical real estate move since the Louisiana Purchase. It also is about ensuring that the Arctic remains an American lake. and that the final frontier of Earth's resources stays in friendly hands. If the U.S. loses its influence here, the northern border of NATO becomes a massive vulnerability that no amount of spending can fix. All right, let's flip the thermostat from deep freeze to tropical heat. Welcome to Venezuela. If Greenland is the shield, Venezuela is the gas tank. We're talking about a country that sits on 303 billion barrels of oil. To put that in perspective, that's more than Saudi Arabia. It's more than the U.S. and Russia combined. For Washington, Venezuela isn't just a country. It is the ultimate strategic reserve that happens to be just a short boat ride from the Gulf of Mexico. Now, why is the U.S. so invested in a country that clearly doesn't want its help? It's because of heavy crude. Not all oil is created equal. The stuff in Texas is light and sweet, but the stuff in the Orinoco Belt in Venezuela is heavy and sour. Here is the kicker. The multi-billion-dollar refineries in Louisiana and Texas were specifically built to process this Venezuelan sludge. If the U.S. loses access to Venezuelan oil, those refineries have to be rebuilt at an insane cost, or they have to buy heavy oil from rivals like Russia. But there's a deeper, darker layer to this: the petrodollar. Since the 1970s, the world has traded oil in U.S. dollars. This is what keeps the American economy afloat, while the government prints trillions. If Venezuela, the king of oil reserves, decides to start selling its oil in Chinese yuan or Russian rubles, it creates a domino effect. If the oil world moves away from the dollar, the U.S. loses its superpower status overnight. This is why the U.S. keeps such a tight grip on Caracas. It's not just about democracy. It's about making sure the world's biggest gas station keeps taking American currency. Then there's the Monroe Doctrine. This is the 200-year-old no trespassing sign the U.S. put up for the Western Hemisphere. Currently, Venezuela is acting like a VIP lounge for America's biggest enemies. You've got Russian Tu-160 White Swan bombers landing there. You've got Chinese state-owned companies owning massive chunks of their infrastructure. You've even got Iranian tankers doing side deals in the Caribbean. For the Pentagon, this is a nightmare scenario. Having a Russian or Chinese military presence in Venezuela is like having a burglar living in your guest bedroom. The U.S. can't afford to lose Venezuela because, if they do, the Caribbean, long considered America's lake, becomes a contested zone. Imagine a scenario where, during a conflict over Taiwan, China tells the U.S., "If you interfere, we'll shut down the oil flow from Venezuela and put a missile battery in Caracas." That's a checkmate. But it's not just oil. In the southern part of the country, in the Arco Minero, Venezuela is sitting on massive amounts of gold, coltan, and thorium. Coltan is the blue gold inside your smartphone and your PlayStation. If the U.S. loses access to these South American minerals while China controls the Arctic ones, the American tech industry is toast. This is a game of resource monopoly, and Venezuela is the most valuable property on the board. The U.S. strategy here is a mix of maximum pressure and soft diplomacy, all aimed at one goal: ensuring that the 300 billion barrels of oil and the mountains of gold stay within the Western financial orbit. Now, let's bridge the gap between the ice and the jungle. We are currently living through the great energy transition. Everyone wants to go green. Everyone wants EVs, wind turbines, and high-capacity batteries. But here, as is dirty, secret of green energy, it requires a lot of mining. And guess who has the mines? Greenland and Venezuela. In Greenland, the retreat of the ice is revealing a geological buffet. We're talking about zirconium, niobium, and tantalum. These aren't just fancy words. They are the ingredients for superalloys. You want to build a jet engine that doesn't melt at high speeds? You need niobium. You want to build a nuclear reactor that lasts 50 years? You need zirconium. Currently, the U.S. is dangerously dependent on unfriendly nations for these. If Greenland becomes a sovereign nation that leans toward the Eurasian bloc, the U.S. loses its ability to build the hardware of the future. Over in Venezuela, the mining arc is the Southern Hemisphere's answer to the Silicon Valley supply chain. We are talking about bauxite for aluminum and iron ore on a scale that is hard to imagine. But the real prize is the thorium. Many experts believe thorium is the future of clean nuclear energy. It is safer and more abundant than uranium. Venezuela has some of the largest thorium deposits in the world. If the U.S. can help stabilize the region and secure these mining contracts, they effectively win the Green War. This is why we see a new great game playing out. It's not just about territory, it's about spheres of influence. The U.S. is using a strategy called friendshoring. They realize that having a factory in China is a liability, so they want to move the source of their power to the Western Hemisphere. Greenland in the north and Venezuela in the south create a vertical axis of resource security. Think about it. If you're a CEO in New York, you want your minerals coming from a place where the U.S. Navy can protect the shipping lanes. The north-south route is much easier to defend than a trans-Pacific route that passes through the South China Sea. By locking down Greenland and Venezuela, the U.S. creates a Fortress Americas. But the competition is fierce. China's Belt and Road Initiative has already poured billions into South America. They aren't just buying oil, they're buying loyalty. They are building dual-use ports that can handle cargo today and warships tomorrow. In Greenland, they tried to buy an old naval base. The U.S. had to scramble to block that deal. It is a 24/7 chess match where the pieces are minerals and the board is the entire planet. The U.S. can't afford to lose because in this game, there is no second place. You either own the resources or you're at the mercy of the person who does. So what does the end game look like? If you look at a map of the world in 2050, it will either be bipolar or multipolar. The U.S. is fighting tooth and nail for a world where the Western Hemisphere remains the undisputed center of gravity. Greenland and Venezuela are the anchors of this strategy. Let's look at the Arctic sovereignty issue. Greenland is moving toward independence from Denmark. This is a delicate moment. If the U.S. plays its cards right, a newly independent Greenland becomes a compact of free association partner, much like Palau or the Marshall Islands. This would give Greenland its own flag, but give the U.S. exclusive military and resource rights. It's a win-win. Greenland gets rich off American investment, and the U.S. gets a permanent aircraft carrier in the north. Now, look at the Venezuela pivot. The U.S. is slowly realizing that regime change hasn't worked. The new strategy is engagement through energy. By allowing companies like Chevron to resume operations, the U.S. is slowly re-weaving Venezuela into the Western economy. The goal is to make Venezuela so dependent on American technology and American refineries that they can't afford to be enemies anymore. It's geopolitics through the wallet. But the stakes couldn't be higher. We are talking about the de-dollarization threat. If Russia, China, and a hostile Venezuela successfully create an alternative financial system, the U.S. will lose its ability to sanction its enemies. The economic hammer of Washington would be broken. To prevent this, the U.S. must keep Venezuela in its orbit. They need that oil to be sold in dollars, and they need those gold reserves to be kept in Western banks. In the north, it's about the climate war. As the ice melts, new lands are being discovered. There are mountains in Greenland that haven't been seen by human eyes in 100,000 years. What's under them? Diamonds, uranium, more rare earths. The U.S. wants to be the one holding the map when those discoveries are made. This isn't just about greedy Americans. This is about the survival of the current world order. For the last 80 years, the U.S. has guaranteed freedom of the seas and global trade. That system only works if the U.S. has the resources to back it up. If they lose the Arctic shield and the tropical tank, they can no longer protect their allies or themselves. The U.S. is betting the house on these two assets because they are the booker. bookends of the American empire. If one falls, the whole shelf collapses. From the radar stations in the freezing winds of Pituffik to the oil pumps in the sweltering heat of the Orinoco, the American century is being defended every single day. The world might see a giant ice cube and a nation in crisis, but the people in this situation room see the future of human history. Otro. So, there you have it. The secret reason why a block of ice and an oil-rich nation are the most important spots on the American map. It's not just about what's on the surface, it's about the power buried underneath. The U.S. isn't just watching these places, they are fighting a silent high-stakes war to keep them. What do you think? Is the U.S. being a protective big brother or a global landlord? And which of these two do you think is more important for the future? The Arctic's minerals or Venezuela's oil? Let me know in the comments. I'm reading every single one. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the geopolitics of the future, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe. We're uncovering the stories the mainstream media won't touch. See you in the next one.